Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Life and Happiness Podcast, the show that takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible.
Welcome to GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alyssa Jo. Hello, everybody. How's it going today? I hope you're having a wonderful day so far. Happy Thursday. Hope you're having a good week. I hope it's been filled with lots of positive energy and vibes. I am back to share more information with you on how to live your life to the happiest and the fullest. I've been feeling pretty good. I just moved back home. Actually, today marks my first day moving back home for a couple months when I get some of my stuff sorted before I go back out to where I was. So I'm home. I'm in my hometown for a couple months, which is it's just good feelings. It's just nice to be around family, even though it is only, for a short term, but that's okay. Like, a little bit's better than nothing, right? And so I'm happy to be back, but I'm especially happy to be back here sharing more feel-good information with you on how you can live your life to the happiest and the fullest. So today I wanted to talk about something called dissociation. Maybe you've heard of dissociation, maybe you have not heard of dissociation. I'm hoping maybe today I'm going to go through so much information about it. Maybe you'll be able to recognize some of these things within yourself. You might be able to recognize some of these things within others around you, your family, your friends, people that you're close to. Dissociation is really serious, and I will get into it, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain exactly what dissociation is. It's serious, but sometimes it can be hard to recognize within yourself and with others. So we're definitely going to be going through exactly what it is. I got a study for you about it, so I got some scientific information to back it all up. I have some symptoms of dissociation. I'm going to talk about what it feels like. There's a few different types of dissociation disorders. So I'm going to go through kind of the main different types of dissociation disorders. Maybe you'll be able to recognize some things within those. And then, of course, I will talk about how to stop dissociating, how to help you with that, but I will also talk about how it works in the brain, all these fun things. So lots of information about dissociation today. I honestly didn't realize what, I feel like I've heard of this before, but I didn't realize what it was called. Didn't really quite understand the gist of it until I started doing research for today's episode, and it happens to all of us when we don't expect it. So what exactly dissociation is a break in how our mind handles information. So you may feel disconnected, basically, from your thoughts, your feelings, memories, your surroundings. It can affect your sense of identity, your perception of time. Symptoms often can go away on their own, but it can take hours, days, weeks. Basically, it's involving a detachment from reality rather than a loss of reality. So you're feeling detached, dissociation. So it's a detachment from your body, your emotions, your surroundings. Everybody dissociates sometimes, but survivors of trauma are more likely to have severe dissociation. So we will talk a little bit more about why you might be experiencing dissociation. But basically, in short term, dissociation is the brain's way of protecting you from overwhelming pain. And in long term, the trauma kind of it's going to catch up to you. It always catches up. And dissociation can mean greater likelihood of PTSD, of self-harm, or even hallucinations. So there's obviously a lot to dissociation and what it all involves. So basically, everyone dissociates at least sometimes in their life. Some are just more severe than others or longer term than others. But think about all the times that you've read a page over again because your mind was completely elsewhere. You felt completely detached. And not even that you're like thinking about, something else. Your mind is like wandering to something else. Well, it can be as well, but just sometimes you just forget. You're like, what was I doing? I was scanning the page, but I did not, you didn't actually obtain any of the information. Or how many times have you pulled into your driveway and not remembered how you got there? Like, obviously you knew you drove there, but like, it's like, oh my God, how did I get here? You don't actually remember the driving part, which is crazy. And because our mind just works in such crazy ways, and naturally we just drive to our house or we drive to whatever our destination is, right? And so we can be dissociated because of that. It's the craziest thing. So researchers have examined adults who were admitted to level 1 trauma centers after traumatic injuries, and they were assessed during admission and within 1 month, and then they were reassessed 3 months later. So what these researchers found that those who had more panic symptoms immediately after their injury also had more dissociation, which of course kind of makes sense because the more overwhelming the experience, the more likely for someone to tap out of reality. But this higher dissociation also predicted more likelihood of post-traumatic stress disorder 3 months later as well. So it's as if the initial tapping out of the reality only postponed the psychological pain, making it even worse later. It's funny because when you think of, it's kind of nice to forget about my pain, or it's kind of nice to not remember about something, right? Yes, but it all catches up. It's like when you bottle down your emotions, sometimes it feels good to push them down and push them away because you're not dealing with them. But the longer that we push something down, we push something away from us, it does not make it any easier. It's going to make it actually more difficult. So that's what can happen with dissociation. You feel like you're forgetting about things, like you're pushing things past, like you're just dealing with them in this great way, when in reality, it's going to come back to bite you even worse when you have PTSD and all these other things that can happen. So, this might be the case for a lot of survivors of childhood sexual abuse, in some very specific ways exactly. So adults who hallucinate, so basically hear or see things that aren't there, they're more likely to have experienced sexual abuse as a child. This is just from a study. And this connection works at least partially through the victim's higher tendency to dissociate. And how can you blame? How can you blame someone for dissociating, after going through that kind of trauma, right? Of course you are. So all of the peaks to dissociation is kind of a double-edged sword. And on the one hand, it offers an emergency escape pod from reality when the body and the mind really need it. This is our mind protecting us. And then on the other hand, abuse survivors have gotten so much practice at dissociation that it often becomes automatic in times of stress, strong emotion, or perceived danger. So when dissociation continues to be used even when the threat ceases to exist, then the child abuse survivor grows up and moves out, the abuser dies or is imprisoned, then dissociation stops protecting and starts getting in the way. So it leaves the person disconnected, spaced out, and more vulnerable to more danger, which is kind of ironic, right? So dissociation is not a good thing. And that's why I'm talking about it today, because it can happen to us all the time. Like I said, how many times have you pulled up on your driveway and not remembered how you got there? Or the whole drive was just such a blank. And so it's simple things like that to more serious things like sexual abuse as a child or some other kind of traumatic event when you were younger or even when you're older, that can trigger dissociation. And it needs to be talked about because I feel like a lot of people don't understand this concept. And the more that we talk about things like this that to do with our mental health, the more we become aware of them, the more we spread that awareness, and then we can help one another and we can end that stigma around all different types of mental health. And then, of course, use that to live our life to the happiest and the fullest. And we all dissociate, which is something that you might never have thought of before. But now you might find things as I talk through this episode that you can relate to or that you recognize in yourself or in somebody else. And the more that you can recognize these things, obviously the easier and the healthier it'll be for you to live your life to the happiest and the fullest. It's just dissociation is kind of inevitable. We're all going to go through it. So that's why it's super, super important to talk about it. Whether it's extremely severe or not so severe, it's going to happen at some point when you pull up in your driveway or whatever the case is. All right, so it's time for a little bit of a break, but when we get back, I'm going to be jumping into the symptoms of dissociation. We're going to be talking about exactly what it feels like, the most common dissociation types, and yeah, lots of more information to share with you. There's so many good things that you are going to want to listen to. So don't go anywhere. I will be right back.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alyssa Jo, just in case you forgot. Hello. We're talking all about dissociation today. Big word, has a lot to it. So let's talk about the symptoms of dissociation. So amnesia. So this means that your memory loss, right? So you might lose your memories of things that have happened to you. Depersonalization. Feeling disconnected from your own body. I'm going to go more in depth with this one for sure. And derealization, so feeling disconnected from the world around you. I'm going to go way more into depth about those two in particular. But there's also identity confusion, where you just might not have a sense of who you are. Identity alteration, so this means your identity may have changed. You might remember your old identity or not. Loss of feelings, and losing control of your body movements. So these are kind of the symptoms of dissociation. There's a lot more information, so I'm going to be diving in kind of to more specific ones. But you might have these symptoms for as long as the event that triggered them or for a short time afterwards. And then this is called an episode of dissociation. So for some people, these symptoms can last much longer. And if you have a dissociative disorder, you might experience these symptoms for longer episodes or even consistently, like all the time, constantly experiencing something like this. So it all depends on you, depends on the situation, the trauma, what triggered it. There's so much that goes into it. So remember that this is kind of a broad spectrum of everything. You're going to have to tailor exactly what's to you, and it can be different for everybody. So what exactly does dissociation feel like? And the two most common forms is depersonalization and derealization, which I did mention. So depersonalization is feeling detached or alienated from your body, meaning that individuals basically experience depersonalization, often report not recognizing themselves in the mirror. So feeling like your body is not your own, feeling as if somebody else is speaking, or even being temporarily unable to talk. So it's kind of what people describe as an out-of-body experience. So for many, there's a sense of emotional numbing to it as well. So just kind of feeling meh about things that should really be more emotionally intense. It can be a worrying experience if it feels kind of profound and uncontrollable. But like most things, depersonalization exists on a spectrum. So you may even be able to induce some depersonalization by staring intently at your own hand for 1 to 2 minutes. Crazy, right? So that's what depersonalization is. You're basically forgetting who you are. You are being disconnected from your own body. You're not recognizing yourself. You're looking in the mirror. You're just you don't recognize yourself. You are confused, basically. And derealization is feeling detached or alienated from your surroundings, so from your world. It's like being in the middle of a crowded party and feeling like you're just kind of vaguely watching it on TV. Weird, right? But people will often say that the world looks fake or that they are seeing it through a veil, like very foggy almost. And others report that the world loses color and it looks quite gray. And then some people will experience actually derealization during sex, and this can contribute to having sexual dysfunction disorders. So dissociation, there's so many different types, but it can all lead to different dysfunction disorders as well. So like depersonalization, derealization exists on a spectrum as well. So if you've ever stared into a campfire, say, or a strobe light, you may have you kind of a glimpse of what this feels like, right? Because you kind of get that foggy, disconnected feeling from the world. It's like, whoa, for a second, right? But you may also be able to induce some minor derealization by staring closely at a wall for a couple minutes. Just like depersonalization, staring at your hand closely for a couple minutes, you can kind of induce a little bit of that as well. So those are the two main types of dissociation, because it kind of covers, right? It's like yourself and then your world. So those are the two main types, but there are more different disorders. So one being dissociative amnesia, which I mentioned amnesia before. And if you have dissociative amnesia, you might not remember things that have happened to you. So this may relate to a stressful or traumatic event, but doesn't always have to. And then in severe cases, you might struggle to remember who you are, what happened to you, or how you felt at the time of the trauma. So this could happen a lot, after an accident, right? Or if you got a really bad concussion, you might have amnesia, dissociative amnesia. And this is not the same as simply just like forgetting something. It is a memory lapse is what they call it. And this means that you cannot access the memories at that time, but they are not like permanently lost. But with dissociative amnesia, you might still engage with other people, so such as like holding conversations, and you might still remember other things and live a normal life, but you might have flashbacks or unpleasant thoughts or nightmares about the things you struggle to remember, which strangely enough, dissociative amnesia connects with dissociative fugue, which is where someone with dissociative amnesia basically travels or wanders somewhere else related to the things that they cannot remember. So you may or may not have traveled on purpose either. Okay. Another one is DID, so dissociative identity disorder, or people can call it multiple personality disorder, but DID is what it's really called. And if you have DID, you might seem to have two or more different identities. So alternate identities. And these identities might take control at different times. So you might find that your behavior changes depending on which identity has control. And you may also have some difficulty remember things that have happened as you switch between identities. So some people with DID are aware of their different identities while others are not. So there's a lot of disagreement between researchers over the notion of DID. They do think of someone with DID as having different identities, but some researchers think that these are actually different parts of one identity which are not working together properly. So they suggest that DID is caused by experiencing severe trauma over a long time in childhood. And by experiencing trauma in childhood, you take on different identities and behaviors to protect yourself. So as you grow up, like these behaviors become more fully formed until it looks like you have different identities. When in fact, it's actually just the different parts of your identity that don't work properly together. So there you have it. That's DID. Now another one is specified dissociative disorder. So with this diagnosis, you might regularly have the symptoms of dissociation, but not fit into any of the specific types. So a psychiatrist uses this diagnosis when they think the reason you dissociate is important. So the reasons they could give you, there's a little list of them that I found here. So you dissociate regularly and have done for a long time. You might dissociate in separate or regular episodes. Between these episodes, you might not notice any changes. You have dissociation from something that like someone else forced or persuaded you to do. So for example, if you were brainwashed or imprisoned for a long time. Your dissociation is acute, which means that your episode is short but severe. So it might be because one or more stressful events that have happened to you, or you are in a dissociative trance. So this means you have very little awareness of things happening around you, or you might not respond to things and people around you because of the trauma. So that's specific dissociative disorder. Then there's also unspecified dissociative disorder, and this diagnosis is also used where you dissociate but do not fit into any of the specific disorders, and psychiatrists will use this diagnosis when they choose not to give a reason that you have the symptoms, or if they do not have enough information for the specific diagnosis. So for example, like after a first assessment in an accident or an emergency, you might get the unspecified dissociative disorder. So it's kind of just not as specific or particular, right? Because you cannot fit into those categories quite yet. All right, so it's time for another break, but don't go anywhere, because when we get back, I am now going to be jumping into how dissociation works in the brain, and then of course leaving you with some tips of how to stop dissociating. So lots more information to share with you. Don't go anywhere. I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast. Hello. We're talking all about dissociation. Okay, so I just went through the main different types of dissociation, but in particular, the main two types are depersonalization and derealization. So depersonalization is feeling detached or alienated from your body, and you basically do not recognize yourself in the mirror. Where derealization is feeling detached or alienated from your surroundings. So from the world. The world could look fake, it could look gray, it could be kind of foggy, and then this can all spiral into other dysfunctional disorders as well. So those are the two main types, but then of course there is amnesia and identity disorder and unspecified dissociative disorder and specified dissociative disorder. So much information, it all tailors to different people at different times. But how exactly does dissociation work in the brain? Well, dissociation, just like any other psychological experience, is based in our brain, right? So there's still a lot of mystery surrounding how it works exactly, but researchers have found a few ways that the brain activity of people with dissociation or derealization disorders differ from those without the disorder. And so one difference lies in the brain system that controls the fight or flight response. So in those who often have dissociation or derealization, this brain area is always a little hyperactive. But when something stressful happens, it actually doesn't activate as much as it should. So there's also less of a feedback loop in the brain system that tells it to cool off after it's been activated for too long. So another difference lies in the limbic system, so the emotion processing center of the brain, and this area is also less activated than it should be during dissociation, showing again how the brain zones out. Okay, so it's all lies into your brain. Like I said, it's all different for everybody, but we can be feeling this at any time in our life. So it's so important to be talking about it, whether you're pulling up in your driveway or you're going through the healing process of a traumatic event. It is so, so important to understand the things that you can do. So if you are feeling dissociating, how do you bring yourself back from that? And the first and foremost is if you've recognized yourself in anything that I've talked about in today's show and have survived trauma or abuse, it's definitely worth seeking out help. Dissociation often kind of rides piggyback with PTSD, and both are treatable, of course, but going to a mental health professional with experience treating PTSD with dissociation is a very good thing, very good place to start, especially if you're experiencing quite severe dissociation. It's something that you do need professional help with. I am going to be giving you kind of 3 main tips of how to stop dissociating. But if you do find yourself in these severe episodes, or you really recognize yourself in just any of these things that it worries you at all, I would definitely make sure you go see your health professional. So with that being said, I will give you these 3 kind of generalized tips of how you can stop dissociating. Number 1 is engage your senses. So this is the very classic way to keep yourself from slipping away, because think about it. Dissociation is the opposite of being present, right? You're out of it. You're zoning out. Whether you are not believing in the world that's in front of you or your own body in front of the mirror, you're not present in the moment. So basically, you have to kind of engage your senses. Pop a really strong breath mint, or 3 of them, in your mouth. Put a ice cube in your hand or down your shirt or something. Pay attention to how your feet feel when they're pressing on the floor. Like things like this, really pay attention. Do make a loud sound, like make a big bang or something. Get your ears going. Like, you've got to engage your senses, because this is going to bring you back to the present moment. So name 5 things that you can see right now. Name 5 things you can hear right now. Name 5 things that you can feel right now. Go feel those things. Go make sure you're seeing these things. Make those noises. Touch, you got to make sure you're engaging your 5 sentences. Use your body. Gain some kind of traction by feeling, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting. Eat something. Make something real for you, right? Because dissociation feels very not real. So you have to make something real for yourself. Number 2 is pay very close attention to your breathing. So you can do this anywhere, of course, and nobody has to know you're doing it, but slowly breathe in your nose and really pay attention to that feeling of the air going in your nose, that kind of cool sensation as the air moves into your nostrils. And then follow the air as it enters your nose and spreads to the back of your throat. So you're really kind of scanning your body while you're doing this. and then slowly breathe out. So feel the contrast of the warm air and the sensation as it leaves your nostrils. Then this is again the sensory input that keeps you connected to your body and your surroundings. Breathing is just really paying attention to your breathing is like the most cliche tip ever. But seriously, it helps. It works. If you can practice your deep breathing techniques and really focus on that, it can do wonders for you. So pay attention to your breathing. What I really like to do is I will just go outside and appreciate my surroundings. So walk outside. This is how I kind of get myself back into the present moment. I'll walk outside and I'll look around where I am, okay? And I'll say 3 things that I'm grateful for in that very moment. I will do my 10 deep breaths, count to 10, do them very, very slowly, paying attention to exactly how everything is feeling on that deep breath in and that deep breath out, and over and over and over again. And the more that you're paying attention to your breathing and your body and your surroundings, of course, the better connected that you are going to be. So just pay close attention to yourself is really what it is. You're trying to feel something, whether that's the breathing within your nostrils, or you're finding something like a fuzzy pillow in your house to feel, or a cold ice cube on your hand, or whatever it is. You're really just getting your senses back to one place to stay connected to the present moment. Of course, if you can do meditation, if you can do yoga, if you can do things like that help you get to your present moment, that's super helpful. For me, I really like my journal writing to get me into the present moment. That helps me. Whatever helps you bring you back into the present moment. So number 3, my last generalized tip is to choose an object to keep you in the present moment. Okay, so it could be something like a small stone, it could be a photo, a keepsake. Some people find it helpful to use something wearable like a ring or a necklace charm so that you can always have it with you, because it's not like you can plan when you're going to feel dissociated. So build an association between that and the present. So every time you see it or touch it, remind yourself that you are here and now. And then when you need it, you can reach for it. I like to play with the ring. I like to wear my rings. So I always had one very special ring that I kept on my hand. And it was, if I felt anxious, if I felt weird, if I just felt off, I always found myself playing with that ring. And then when I started doing research about this episode, I'm like, that makes sense, because you're going to an object that you feel closely connected to. That ring to me was very special. So I always felt very closely connected to it, and I always found myself playing with it, fiddling with it, holding it, taking it off my finger, gripping it in my hand to calm myself down or to feel better. And it's that connection that we make with objects that actually can do a huge difference with making sure that we're in the present moment of our lives. So there you have it. That is all the information I have on dissociation today. I hope it was helpful. I hope you were able to learn some interesting facts, maybe recognize some things, or now just be more aware when it happens to you or when it happens to somebody else, and now hopefully know what you can do to get back to that present moment, because it is inevitable. We all feel types of dissociation at some point in our lives. So thank you so much for listening to GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alyssa Jo. I so appreciate you being here. Please do not forget to hit that subscribe button, to like and follow us on social media. I update those very regularly, and leave a 5-star review. It helps out a ton, and I absolutely love reading them. So thank you so much. Stay happy, stay positive, and stay in the present moment. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Life and Happiness Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find the show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows. From the GSMC Podcast Network, from sex and relationships to health and wellness, life and happiness, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Life and Happiness Podcast.